It hits at the same time every afternoon, not when you have pushed yourself, not after something demanding. Just 2 o'clock or thereabouts, and something drops. The thinking slows. The body feels heavier than it did an hour ago. The screen is harder to look at. A task that would have taken 15 minutes at 10 in the morning now feels like it requires something you do not quite have. You reach for coffee. You push through. You tell yourself you did not sleep well enough, or you ate too much at lunch, or this is simply what the afternoon feels like now. You are not wrong that something is happening, but you are almost certainly wrong about what it is. Because the afternoon energy crash that so many adults experience after 60 is not a sleep problem. It is not a food problem. It is not a sign that you need to rest more or try harder. It is a specific, measurable biological event, one that involves 3 distinct physiological systems failing to support each other in the same afternoon window, and almost nobody describing it to their doctor is getting an explanation that accounts for all 3. At around the 9-minute mark, I'm going to show you something about a daily habit that the majority of people over 60 reach for specifically because of this crash. A habit that, according to the research, is directly worsening the underlying mechanism and making the next night's sleep lighter in ways that guarantee tomorrow's crash will be just as bad. Stay with me for that, because it will change the way you think about what you have been doing every afternoon for years. I have worked in geriatric medicine for more than 3 decades. The afternoon energy collapse, what patients describe as the wall, the dip, the 2 o'clock fog, is one of the most consistently dismissed symptoms I encounter. It is dismissed because it is common, and it is common in adults over 60 because a specific biological reason makes it almost inevitable after this stage of life, unless you understand what is driving it. The research gives us that understanding now. And it begins not with what you eat, but with what is happening inside every cell in your body from the moment you wake. Think of your body's energy system as a power grid. In the morning, that grid runs at full voltage. Every appliance, your muscles, your brain, your immune system, your mood, receives the current it needs to function efficiently. By mid-afternoon in a body over 60, that grid voltage drops. Not a blackout, not a failure, a drop. And when a power grid runs at low voltage, appliances do not stop. They dim. They work harder to do the same job. They run slower and produce less output. That is what the afternoon crash feels like from the inside. Not exhaustion, a dimming of the entire system all at once around the same hour every day. 3 things cause that voltage to drop, and each one explains not just why the crash happens, but why it is getting worse with age, and why the things most people do to manage it are aimed at entirely the wrong target. The first is cortisol. Cortisol is often called the stress hormone, and that framing has made it sound like something to minimize. But cortisol serves a second, quieter function that most people have never heard explained. It is the hormone that maintains your baseline energy voltage throughout the day. It is released in a precise rhythm, peaking sharply in the first 30 to 45 minutes after waking, then declining in a gradual arc through the morning and into the early afternoon, settling at its lowest point in the late evening to allow sleep. In a healthy adult under 50, this decline is gradual enough that the afternoon remains functional. In adults over 60, 2 things happen to this curve. The morning peak becomes lower, the voltage starts the day at a reduced level, and the afternoon decline becomes steeper. The drop happens faster and falls further. The result is that by 1 to 2 in the afternoon, cortisol reaches a floor it used not to reach until 5 or 6 in the evening. This is not a cortisol deficiency in the clinical sense. It is a flattening of the curve. And a flat cortisol curve in the afternoon is one of the most consistent biological markers found in adults over 60 who report significant afternoon fatigue. The grid voltage drops not because something went wrong today, but because the rhythm governing it has shifted with age. Here is the connection that makes this more than just a hormone story. The second cause is what happens inside your cells during those same afternoon hours, at the level of the mitochondria. Your mitochondria are the energy-generating structures inside every cell. They produce adenosine triphosphate, ATP, the molecule that powers every biological process in your body, from muscle contraction to neural firing to organ function. After 60, mitochondrial efficiency declines. Not catastrophically, measurably. ATP output per cell drops, and the number of mitochondria per cell also decreases progressively with age. In the morning, when cortisol is high and the biological signals for activity are strong, mitochondrial output is at its best. But in the afternoon, when cortisol is already falling and the mitochondria are working at reduced capacity, ATP production drops below the threshold where everything runs smoothly. The muscles feel heavier because they are receiving less energy currency. The brain slows because neural signaling is energetically expensive and the fuel is running lower. The mood flattens because the neurotransmitter systems that regulate emotional tone are themselves ATP dependent. The grid is not broken, it is running low voltage in every room simultaneously. And the sensation of that, heavy, slow, foggy, flat, is what lands on you at 2 in the afternoon and feels like something you should simply push through. You cannot push through a mitochondrial voltage drop with willpower. You can only work with it or against it. Now, before I show you what working with it actually looks like, and before I get to what I told you at the beginning, I want to give you the third cause, because this one is the most overlooked, and it is the one that connects directly to the 9-minute revelation. The third cause is adenosine. Adenosine is a chemical that accumulates in the brain throughout every waking hour. As it builds, it creates progressively stronger pressure to sleep, what researchers call sleep pressure. In a younger adult, adenosine builds at a moderate rate, and the brain can sustain performance despite its accumulation until well into the evening. After 60, 2 changes occur. Adenosine accumulates more quickly during waking hours, and the brain's ability to resist its signal diminishes. By early to mid-afternoon, the adenosine load in the brain of an adult over 60 has reached a level that creates a genuine, physiological instruction for rest. Not laziness, not weakness. A chemical signal from the brain to the body that says, it is time to slow down. Now. The 9-minute mark. The most common response to the 2 o'clock crash, especially for adults over 60, is caffeine. A coffee, a strong tea, something to push through the wall. It is so ingrained that it barely registers as a choice anymore. It is simply what the afternoon requires. Here is what the research shows caffeine is actually doing in that moment. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors, the sites in the brain where adenosine binds to create sleep pressure. When caffeine blocks those receptors, the adenosine is still accumulating. It is simply prevented from delivering its signal. When the caffeine clears the system, typically 4 to 6 hours after consumption, the adenosine that was blocked floods back to those receptors all at once. The sleep pressure signal, delayed and compounded, arrives in the evening with far greater force, and it disrupts slow-wave sleep, the deep restorative stage, because adenosine receptor dynamics in the evening have been artificially distorted by the afternoon intervention. The crash is not reduced by the coffee. It is postponed and paid for in the currency of lighter, less restorative sleep that night, which produces a lower cortisol peak the following morning, which means a more vulnerable afternoon, which drives a stronger need for caffeine. The cycle does not break, it deepens. A patient of mine, a retired engineer, late 60s, had built his entire afternoon around 2 cups of coffee between 2 and 3, which had quietly become 3 when 2 stopped being sufficient. He was sleeping 7 hours but waking unrefreshed. His GP had found nothing abnormal on standard panels. He had been told it was age. What had not been measured was his diurnal cortisol curve, 4 salivary samples across the day, which showed a morning peak 30% below expected for his age and an afternoon reading that was essentially flat by 1:30. His CoQ10 plasma level, a mitochondrial marker, sat at the lower end of the reference range. And the compounding effect of 3 afternoon coffees on his sleep architecture was visible in his actigraphy data. Almost no slow-wave sleep, which meant no mitochondrial repair occurring overnight, which meant the deficit accumulated nightly and presented again each afternoon, worse than the day before. When afternoon caffeine was removed and replaced with a structured 20-minute outdoor walk taken immediately after his midday meal, using light exposure to reinforce his circadian signal at the precise window where it was most effective, and when CoQ10 supplementation was introduced at a dose agreed with his physician, his afternoon energy stabilized measurably within 5 weeks. The wall stopped appearing at 1:30. It moved to late afternoon. The coffees became unnecessary, and then unwanted. Same man, same age, same body, different inputs at the right times, different afternoon. Here is what I want you to take into your next appointment. 3 specific steps, and for each one the exact language that will move the conversation forward. The first, ask your GP for a diurnal cortisol profile. Not a single morning cortisol reading, a diurnal profile, which measures cortisol at 4 points across the day. Ask for it by name and use these words. I would like a diurnal cortisol profile rather than a single morning reading because I want to understand whether my afternoon energy pattern reflects a change in my cortisol curve. That distinction, diurnal profile versus a single snapshot, is the difference between seeing the full arc and seeing 1 point on it. One tells you almost nothing about the afternoon, the other tells you everything. The second, ask your pharmacist this exact question about every medication you take once daily. Does this medication affect cortisol levels or energy metabolism? And is there a time of day that minimizes any impact on my afternoon energy? Certain blood pressure medications, particularly beta blockers, can blunt the cortisol curve or affect mitochondrial efficiency in ways that compound the afternoon drop. Your pharmacist can check this in ways a brief GP appointment rarely allows time for. The third, for the next 14 days, move any caffeine you currently take after noon to before noon and replace it with a 10 to 20-minute walk outside, taken as soon as possible after your midday meal. This is not a lifestyle suggestion. Outdoor light exposure in that post-meal window reinforces the circadian signal to the brain's master clock at the precise moment it is most receptive to resetting. It is a chronobiological intervention with a specific mechanism and documented effect on afternoon alertness. Try it for 14 days before judging it. Let me bring you back to where this began. 2 o'clock, the wall, the dimming, the thing you have been pushing through and blaming on poor sleep or a heavy lunch or simply getting older. The grid has not failed. The voltage dropped, and it dropped for 3 specific, measurable, interconnected reasons that have nothing to do with effort and everything to do with cortisol rhythm, mitochondrial output, and adenosine accumulation converging in the same afternoon window in a body past 60. The crash is not normal in the sense that it is permanent and unaddressable. It is common. Those are not the same thing. Common means most people over 60 are experiencing it. Unaddressable means nothing can be done. Only the first part is true. Over the next 7 days, note 2 things each day: the exact time the crash arrives, as precisely as you can, and whether you had any caffeine after noon that day. 2 data points. Write them down each evening. Because here is what I have not yet told you. The afternoon crash has 3 distinct biological signatures, and each one responds to a different intervention. The time it hits and your caffeine pattern around it are the 2 clearest indicators of which of the 3 is dominant in your case. Next week, I am going to show you how to read those 2 numbers and what they reveal about whether your crash is primarily cortisol-driven, mitochondrial, or adenosine-mediated, because the fix for each one is different. And knowing which one is yours means not wasting time on the interventions that belong to the other 2. Come back with your 7 days of data. What I am going to show you will make those numbers mean something specific. One important note before you go. Everything in this video is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for the advice of your personal physician. Please do not stop or adjust any medication, including blood pressure medication or any other daily prescription, without first speaking to the doctor or pharmacist responsible for your care. The goal of this video is to give you a more complete picture of what your body is doing in the afternoon, and better questions to bring to the people who can act on them with you. That conversation is where the real change begins.